Good afternoon, and welcome to our event, State Leadership, Making the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program Work. I'm Mark Jamison, a non-resident senior fellow with the American Enterprise Institute. Everyone agrees that broadband is important, so important, in fact, that there are 133 federal programs run by 15 agencies and costing billions of dollars. And when you include the state broadband offices, the number of agencies approaches 70. The most significant program, as of late, is the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, or BEAD, launched in 2021 by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, oversees this $42.5 billion effort, which states are implementing. But BEAD has been slow to launch. Some critics blame NTIA's bureaucracy, but supporters argue that the 3+ years that NTIA has been taken so far were baked into the legislation. Regardless of why that might be, BEAD is now largely in the state broadband office's hands, and the states are eager to provide the leadership to make this work. There are at least three significant challenges at this point for the states. The first is ensuring that BEAD funding goes to the most cost-effective and capable broadband providers. The second is developing and enforcing systems that hold broadband providers accountable for the promises that they've made. And the third is working with the incoming Trump administration to ensure that the underbrush that has held the states back is cleared and remains cleared. Here with us are leaders from three state broadband offices that have been at the forefront of making BEAD work. With us are Dr. Tamara Holmes. She's director of the Office of Broadband for the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. Before taking her current position, she completed a doctorate in public policy and administration and subsequently held positions as associate director for policy and strategic development, as well as program manager for the Virginia Appalachian Regional Commission. Also with us is Brandy Ryder, executive director of the Colorado Broadband Office. Prior to joining the office, she served in local government management, where her responsibilities included broadband, public utilities, and government operations. And we also have with us Vineeth Iyengar. He's executive director of Connect LA in Louisiana. He was previously with the staff of East Baton Rouge Parish Mayor President Sharon Weston Broome, and he co-chaired the governor's Resilient Louisiana Healthcare Task Force and was formerly with Sage Growth Partners. So Tamara, Brandy, and Vineeth, welcome. I have a few questions for each of you, and around 2:45 p.m., we'll open the floor for questions from our audience. So to our audience, if you have questions for our panelists, email them to Kate Beinkampen at aei.org. That's spelled KATE.BEINKAMPEN at aei.org, or simply tweet them or X them to hashtag AskAEITech. That's hashtag AskAEITECH. So Vineeth, I'm going to begin with you. Competition for BEAD dollars is key to making sure that taxpayers, Louisiana taxpayers in your case, and the broadband customers of your states get the most bang for their buck. What are the most important features of a competitive process that states should keep in mind as they decide which broadband providers are going to receive BEAD dollars?
Yeah, great question, Mark, and thanks for inviting us, and happy to be on the panel with my colleagues Brandy and Dr. Holmes. And Happy New Year to everyone on the call. Really, from our perspective, we just concluded a couple of months ago, we concluded our sub-grant program for our BEAD Gumbo 2.0 program. And we published the draft results on November 18th. And we've gone through a period of curing with NTIA, and we hope to get approval very soon. In the case of Louisiana, we were able to achieve the following outcome. Out of the $1.355 billion, we're going to obligate $748 million to build connectivity to 140,000 broadband serviceable locations that were approved by NTIA. 96% of those locations, and we are tech neutral as a state, but 96% of those locations are going to be fiber, 2% will be LEO, and then the balance will be a combination of fixed wireless and cable. What we did in Louisiana, which was critically important, that helped maximize competition, was the following. We created project areas which were minimal. We didn't create these large project areas which would have stifled out some of the smaller providers from participating in the process. So small project areas were critically important. The second is we actually published and made public the benchmark reference funding for every project area that we created. And we actually, and it was not a requirement of NTIA, made public the draft of our project areas and those benchmark funding levels for each project area back in March and April of this year. And that was really critical in terms of getting feedback from the providers on what their participation level was going to be as it relates to our program. The third was we did go through a pre-qualifications process, but we removed a lot of the administrative burdens and hurdles, and we didn't take a really hard approach to removing companies that didn't complete the entirety of their pre-qualifications information. What we wanted to do with their pre-qualifications process was just to filter out those companies that we felt were absolutely bad actors based on histrionics of executing federal programs. And so we reduced the administrative burden to applying for funds. Fourth, that we did that was really important is we oversimplified the application process. This was critical. And so if you knew what you were going to do as an internet service provider, you could actually fill out an application in 20, 25 minutes. You identify the project area, identify what funding level you need, you do a bunch of attestations, and then you hit the submit button. And so the combination of, the free market, aggressive outreach to the companies, minimal project areas, removing the administrative burden, but also the last thing, which I think is really important, is as companies identify based on their capital stack of dollars that they have to invest in throughout the country, it's really critical that not every company is going to have the deep bench and pockets of dollars that they can invest in every BEAD program in every state. So they're also going through this dance with broadband offices to ensure that the environment that they can effectively deploy dollars is going to achieve impact, right, from their perspective. And so in Louisiana, we actually have Louisiana law that states that the moment you sign your subgrant agreement for BEAD, we release out 10% of those funds. And you can actually earn up to 30% of the funds before connectivity starts to begin based on signing of the subgrant agreement, the securing of permits, and anything else that's required from our office before you start to connect. Because we just felt behaviorally that'll help improve cash flow and help accelerate shovels in the ground.
Okay, that's very helpful. So as I understand it, to ensure you had the quality bidders, if you will, you did the pre-qualification. Just the top people, the top organizations can participate. That makes good sense. Then the idea of the small areas, the benchmark funding, the simplifying the process, all of those help people zero in on here's what I am good at, and here's the amount of money that I absolutely need. So the small areas, as I understand it, let people configure. I can serve these. I really can't do that. So you're not trying to find markets for them.
Right.
Benchmarking gave people a starting point. That's often really hard in competitive processes. What kind of money are we talking about? And then that simple process let people zero in on here's how much money I need, as opposed to putting lots of bells and whistles in. Okay, very good. That's helpful. I appreciate that. Brandy, let me turn to you. It's just been my studies over the years that good leaders learn from what's going on and pivot when it's time to pivot. You've had the experience of having to do this in broadband programs. You were holding at one time, as I understand it, and correct me, that there was a bidding process that you were going through. Partway through the process, you learned that things could be better if we changed it. And so you pivoted. You worked with governor, broadband providers, NTIA, so that you could improve the process. That can be pretty perilous. Tell us about that. What was it that you discovered? What did you change? And how did you work through the maze of all the complexities of making the change?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just want to start out by thanking everybody on the call for being here, as well as my colleagues and you, Mark, for carving out time to talk about this, because this is really important. In Colorado, we ran our round one. We opened it up on October 28th, and we received $2.3 billion in requests. The NTI only allocated the state of Colorado $826 million. So it fell really short from the actual demand in our state. And so we had to sharpen our pencils. And so we had to go back to the drawing board. We do know that, round one we feel like was really successful. We had strong participation. We had nearly, 200 applications. We didn't do a pre-qualification process, but we have vetted people very similar to Beneath. But we had to go back and ask ourselves, okay, what can we do in round two to number one, drive participation and bring our costs down? And so so it's taken us a little bit longer to open round two because we had to do a lot of federal advocacy to request several programmatic waivers from the NTIA so that we can craft a round two that's more tailored to the strategies of our round two application. And so what we ended up doing, working closely with the feds, NTIA, and our federal delegation in the governor's office, is we raised our low-cost service option to $75 a month. We also aligned our inflationary metrics with the FCC urban rate survey. We weren't allowed to do that in our initial proposal before. We also removed the requirement that an application is binding. The actual binding agreements really with the subgrantee agreement, award agreement. We removed any bid bond requirements. We also, and I think what's been really great for us, and this is a programmatic waiver that I'm really excited about, even though it's counter to the idea of internet for all. I think internet for all works really well if you have enough money to fund every location, but we do not. So we asked the NTIA for a waiver from the unit for applicants to bid on have to provide service for 100% of the BSLs in our project areas. Our project areas were a little bit larger, of course, but even if we had crafted our project areas to be smaller, our most unserved and underserved locations are in very, very sparse mountainous regions. So our project areas are very expensive. So we were able for round two, applicants, when they bid on our projects, will not have to serve every single BSL within the project area. We are identifying those high cost BSLs, and we have a different strategy for those. Those are going to be alternative technology driven BSLs, and we will publish our high cost thresholds for round two for applicants to know exactly what we can afford for round two. And so we're looking at doing that for that, and we're hopefully gonna open up round two at the end of January. We bumped our extremely high cost per location threshold up for round two. And I know the NTIA, kind of was the initial approach was, you need to have it for the extremely high cost per location threshold really should be statewide. It shouldn't be a rolling target or a rolling benchmark, but we advocated strongly that's going to have to be based on our rounds. We can't one high cost threshold isn't going to work for, let's say, round two, because we just don't have the money to do that. Our final round, with the blessing of not having to serve every single BSL within those project areas, is going to take more of a market-based approach. So we're going to ask ISPs to bid on as many BSLs that are remaining that we designate are available for funding on our BEAD list. Our BEAD list is 160,000 locations, so it's pretty substantial and significant in Colorado, and a lot of states are in the same boat, so we're not unique in that. So we're going to identify those BSLs that are available for funding for round two, and have ISPs give it the costing thresholds that we have designated. One of the other pieces to this, which is very, very, very important to us, when we went through the BEAD process, we've been an early adopter of the BEAD program, and I want to point specifically to the challenge process. Our FCC fabric map is on version 3. We're locked into version 3. So as many of you know, we're actually, the map changes and we're now at, version 5 of that map. Between version 3 and version 5, with all of the investments in broadband, private as well as other funding commitments that the feds through other programs have awarded in our state, that delta is 31,000 locations for the state of Colorado. And so my request to the NTIA was to remove those locations from the map because we can't afford the ones that are even on the map. We can't do that, but we worked with the NTIA really closely to figure out how we can meet in the middle on this. And what that looks like for us is for the version 5 map, for that delta in our round 2 map, we're gonna highlight those BSLs or categorize those BSLs as version 5 BSLs that are now essentially served. Of course, we're going to have to go through the process of verification, and we have some ways to do that are inexpensive to make sure that we're truly those 31,000 locations are actually served. So we will be collecting evidence through our round 2 process. And so we're going to be able to do that in round 2. And I'll be honest, it's been really great working with the NTI and the feds and our governor's office to figure out what is the best approach for round 2. And I think a lot of states in the West might be in the same bucket. And so what I'd encourage people, to really look at those rounds and slow down and really make sure that, the strategy, it meets the mark as far as what you're trying to achieve within your program. So those were some of the major changes that we made in our process. And we're hopefully going to launch our round 2 January 27th.
All right, thank you for that explanation. Let me ask just a little bit further. So at the start, you had the governor's office, ISPs, NTIA, and people who don't have broadband. They had certain expectations, your first round. Second round, you had to lower those expectations. Those had to be some difficult conversations. So give us some hints as to how do you approach that kind of conversation when you're disappointing someone. They're not going to get quite what they thought they might. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, and it was a really challenging conversation because, everybody wants the same thing. Everybody's working towards the same goal. And, when we closed round 2, received just under half of our project areas received bids. And it wasn't, it was a good part, it was a good showing in our program, but, I had to convey that to folks because I think the expectations were, oh, we're going to get to, somewhere north of, 60%, 70%. That just wasn't the case. I was asked by the NTIA, well, what can we do to make to drive participation in round 2? And of course, I always say, if you're asking an honest question, I'm going to give you an honest answer. And I listed off several items. And to be honest, a lot of the issues that were apparent in round 1 have been issues for the entire program. It's feedback we heard over and over again. What we ended up doing to make sure that we're including public input, and that's really important in our program. We do our best to try to accommodate it. We hit pause and did a market sounding initiative where we collected feedback from providers and our stakeholders on what can the CBO and the feds do to make this better for you in round 2. So it wasn't just me coming at the table with what I thought, but I also had all the feedback that we received from that market sounding. We shared it with the governor's office, and we also shared it with the NTIA and our senators that have been advocating for us at the federal levels. And so it was a two-pronged approach: leadership from the state asking for it, but also all of our stakeholders. So it really helped the conversation, and it really helped the NTI and the feds feel comfortable with the changes. The other piece of it as well, and every state's different and has different dynamics. In our state, with the federal government, our contacts we've been very collaborative since the beginning. So we had several meetings with them, shared our data, shared where we were, and even to the point where I asked them, I said, okay, the opportunity cost of 100% for Colorado is $400 million going to alternative technology. because we have to have enough money saved over to get to 100% from round one. So, and I asked, I said, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want that, or do we want to try to fit as much fiber into this program as possible? But with the understanding that this is the opportunity costs. And so I really had to communicate that to folks that are making the decisions and advocating for us. And we all agreed collectively what that approach should be. And that was to request the waiver for the 100% so that we could get as much fiber to the home as possible with the funding that we have. And I gave assurances to folks because we do have a state broadband program that's funded with state dollars. We've had that program for about 10 years. And the remaining BSLs that will be unserved after the BEAD program, we will continue to fund those, and we will prioritize those locations. So it's not that they're never going to get broadband. It's just they're just going to have to wait a little longer. So we'll get there, but we want to make sure that we maximize our dollars in this program to get as much permanent infrastructure as possible built to those locations.
Okay, thank you very much. One of my favorite books is called Leadership on the Line, and it's about how to help organizations pivot when the world around them has changed. And it's not about saying we're going this way. It's about bringing people along and helping them diagnose. You followed it to a T, so you should be a co-author of the book, I think.
I'll have to read it.
It's great. I highly recommend it. Dr. Holmes, let me turn to you now. You found yourself in a different situation than either Colorado or Louisiana, namely that your office had long established broadband support efforts, but then BEAD comes along and has a host of different types of requirements that necessitated you resetting practices, resetting expectations. Other states find themselves in these kinds of situations. Please describe what you needed to do in order to have a successful reset of how things had been done before.
Sure, and so thank you for having me join you this afternoon with both Brandy and Beneath. They're both respected colleagues, and we spent a lot of time talking about what's happening in our respective state. As Brandy said, they have a 10-year program, and so Brandy and I talk a lot about being veterans in this space. And so I will share that, we've had a 7-year runway in Virginia. We currently manage about $2 billion in broadband investments that are currently underway, about $1 billion in state funding and another $1 billion in match funding from local governments and private sector partners. And so I'd like to believe that we've experienced a lot of bumps and bruises in those last 7 years. And so when we think about BEAD in Virginia, we really look at our Virginia Telecommunication Initiative program and what are components that can be utilized to develop our BEAD program. And so we did not scrap what we have been doing for 7 years, but how do we take the work we've been doing through VADI and kind of map it into those BEAD requirements? And so, as you said earlier, we don't directly contract with internet service providers in our state program. We have a unit of local government that partners with a private ISP company or a municipal broadband authority, and they jointly submit an application. And so there's a lot of accountability in even the development of that public-private partnership, because I will tell you, one of the things that was a catalyst for us developing a program of the nature of VADI was because local governments felt left out of broadband expansion. Think about historically, broadband expansion was ISPs receiving funding from, I won't name the federal agency, receiving funding from a variety of federal agencies and building in communities. The localities, as we say in Virginia, really didn't feel like they had a dog in the fight. And so VADI was developed where a local government had a seat at the table and they pulled their partner in to submit an application. And so if you've ever worked with local governments and local leaders, you do know they put a lot of accountability measures in. And so one of the things we've adopted from VADI into the BEAD program is, if you all know about the point allocations in BEAD, states were given about 25% of the bucket of points for BEAD. And so we did include in our application process that if an internet service provider gets a letter of support from a government in the areas in which they want to submit an application, that we will give up to 10 points for that. And so the 10 points can potentially make or break an application being able to be successful in our BEAD program. And so you'll be again surprised what a unit of local government will put on the table for an ISP to even get that letter for BEAD. And so what you see is a lot of the transition of what we saw through VADI to get an ISP to partner on a project, transitioning into BEAD, even though we now directly contract with those ISPs because 10 points are tied to getting local support for your application. The other so the other thing that allows to happen is all parties are vested. One of the things that has been really important in our program, and so we'll put in traditional accountability measures like one, it's a reimbursable grant, so you have to demonstrate that you've built out the network before we will release any grant funds. That's how we work through the body program. Our project areas are zip code tabulation areas, and they actually are consistent based on a county boundary. And so providers will bid on zip code tabulation areas within counties. And so that's the other way where you kind of have a defined boundary so that if County X wants to submit a letter of support, it's with that project is within their respective county. And so they know what they're going to get from that provider. We've been really successful in our build outs. Of course, we require monthly reports, quality assurance and quality control checks on networks as they're designed, site visits. And then one of the most important pieces is because what we've seen since COVID is that folks want internet today. Sometimes they want it yesterday. And so all providers that participate in body that will also participate in BEAD will be required to have a communications plan. And I don't mean just a written communications plan. I mean one that says you're going to go to local board meetings. You're going to put out information to the areas in which you're going to serve through the BEAD program. We also have a publicly facing dashboard that shows progress of projects throughout the state. And so we will continue to use that dashboard. Dashboard is populated by the data we receive in monthly and quarterly reports. And so I'd like to say that while we are transitioning from a program where we will have a direct relationship with the ISPs, we will still have a lot of the requirements that we currently use for our state-funded program as part of the BEAD program, and then also make the program as user-friendly as possible. Vineet kind of touched on it earlier. You know, you don't want the program to be so complicated that providers aren't interested in it. We did have over 40 providers submit letters of intent to participate in our state BEAD program. And so that is actually more than who currently participate in our program now. And so we're doing a lot of education with all of the ISPs that are interested on the BEAD program.
Okay, thank you. You anticipated what my next question was going to be about the holding people accountable. So I appreciate your doing that because that is key, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I want to take you back to something you talked about, and that is this support from the local governments. And not with BEAD, I haven't seen it with BEAD, but with other programs in the past. You can, for the projects that don't succeed, you can, if you do the work, you can track the granting of the money through to a political connection. You can see, oh, this person got this money because they're connected to, they contribute a lot to this political party. You could see all that, and as you might imagine, those projects weren't very successful. How do you ensure that when somebody's getting a letter of support from a local government, that it really is about the quality of the work and not just this is so-and-so's brother-in-law? How'd you do that?
So I will tell you, I've not seen any instances of, you know, folks having connections personally for or even our current body program. As I said, local governments have been left, you know, did not have a seat at the table for many government funded broadband expansion programs. And so I haven't seen any instances of that. If anything, I feel like local governments have put a lot of accountability measures in place for support for projects. The reason Body's been so successful is because the unit of the government will put out a request for proposal often, and they'll have multiple providers show interest in partnering in a body application. And so they will select their most appropriate partner and they'll submit an application jointly together. And throughout the duration of the construction, there's a lot of monitoring, not just from our side as the grantor, but also of the unit of local government, who in essence is the pass-through. And so I haven't seen any instances or known of any instances where, you know, a project might have been supported by local government because of a personal connection. If anything, some personal connections sometimes will fall apart. I've seen that happen where maybe there might be a local incumbent that it might have come in and maybe they bit off more than they could chew. And so we work very closely with providing technical assistance and support in managing those relationships between those entities. But again, I've never seen any instances where someone would have, if anything, you've seen them not want to give a letter of support because of past behavior of a provider in a county or not knowing about a particular provider.
Hey,
Okay,
Mark,
so
can I add a couple?
sure, please.
So in the case, so for us, it's always been about learned behavior and what we've learned from executing previous federal programs and how we apply to succeeding federal programs. In the case of our ARPA program, we actually scored letters of support from local governments. But what we soon realized though in that first round of using our ARPA dollars is if you shift some of the responsibilities on the front end to a local government while they want to be a participant, then it might actually bog down and create a little bit more politics, right? Because now they're having to choose between different vendors, different providers, and it becomes a little bit more complex. What we consistently heard at the end of our ARPA dollars, especially in terms of what was really important to the local governments, was to ensure that every single location in their parish that were either unserved and underserved were effectively captured as part of the 140,000 BSLs that were approved by NTIA. And so when we released out the maps this past March, the draft of the project areas and the reference funding, they were largely pleased because they could see that the inputs that they provided to our office in terms of which areas of their parish were unserved and which ones were underserved were actually captured as those locations that were truly unserved and underserved. And from their perspective, they were really happy. For our Gumbo 2.0, which is our BEAD funds, we did not even score match, neither did we collect letters of support from local governments. Because what we want the local governments to start focusing on, to your point now, Mark, is execution. Because now we're going to start to move the execution risk post approval of our final proposal from our office to the internet service providers. The internet service providers need to now start focusing on working with local communities and local officials on sort of their route tree of building their network design and ensuring they get their appropriate permits to ensure that shovels are in the ground as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Okay, so you've had two different approaches between Virginia and Louisiana with respect to how the local governments engage. What's in common, I think, in your approaches is the transparency and the shining of light on things. That sounded like that was really key in the case of Virginia. That, okay, so a local government may have some friends, but all the people in the area are going to know what's going on. They're going to see it. And political favor is a little tough to do in the light of day. And you avoided that, Louisiana, by saying the local government's here and involved, but this is a transparent competitive process at our level as well. Okay, very good. I appreciate that because the competition is really key. And competition is always about making sure that no provider has some sort of unearned advantage through a connection, through hidden information, whatever that might be. And so we've learned over the years how to handle those things. Let me go on to the accountability question. Vineet, I'll come back to you on it as well, but let me turn to Brandy first. As we've looked at past programs, there's been a lot of them that either had very weak expectations of what people would do, or they weren't spelled out and people didn't follow up. So in the case of BEAD, what are the things, Randy, that you're doing, you'd suggest for other states to ensure that this money does indeed accomplish what it is supposed to accomplish?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Accountability is really important. And I think one of the biggest reasons why BEAD was handed to the states to do was to try something different at the federal level. I will tell you, I do think states are in the best position to ensure that these dollars are spent the way they're supposed to and that what providers committed to is actually being done. I'll go back to kind of our state broadband program. So we've been in the business for a while now, and we already had a pretty big compliance function for broadband grants already at the state of Colorado. And so what we ended up doing was taking, that program lessons learned, perfecting it for the federal programs, because the federal programs obviously have a lot more compliance and like the state and per se, because there's more requirements just in general. But what we've done, and especially with our ARPA dollars, so SLFRF, CPF, and all the ABCs, we have really beefed this up. What we've done is we have tied reimbursements to project milestones. In the state of Colorado, we can't upfront money; it's against our laws. But the reimbursement requests are based on completing specific milestones within your project. We put those in our grant agreement as well as all of our compliance documentation. And there's several videos. We create a bunch of a library of videos, if you will, to help educate people on what that means. With those milestones, the Colorado Broadband Office, working with our consultant, does desktop monitoring as well as field monitoring. Into field monitoring, what that means is we go to the sites that were awarded, and we monitor the sites. We collect information to make sure everything's on track. And so we really encourage people to be organized and have their documentation in a row, or their ducks in a row before we head out there. We also look at quarterly compliance and monitoring with our site visits, so we're double checking every single time. We also have an internal compliance dashboard that's shared with the staff, as well as our consultant tracks that, so we can get ahead of issues before they become real issues where somebody might get in trouble and they might default or something to that effect. I think the biggest key for us is open lines of communication, checking in, because you don't want to wait until that specific milestone or that quarter. We're constantly looking at how projects are being spent down. And where there's issues, we set up kind of a risk mitigation plan for those ISPs that we deem that are high risk. So they'll have additional requirements if we deem that they're high risk, or they become high risk through the duration of their project. We do this in our state broadband program. We also do this in our federal programs. And just to kind of highlight the success of it, we've been in the business of grant making since 2015. And we've invested over $116 million over roughly 10 years in broadband funding. And this includes 113 projects. And we've only had 2 defaults in 10 years. I wish it was 0, but we've only ever had 2. And the situations were pretty specific. It wasn't something that we could have kept track of. It was, just some issues with, parent companies, and sometimes people, when they get into business together, they realize it shouldn't be, and things fall apart, or they're acquired. And so we've had only 2. And so I feel like that's a pretty good success rate for us. And I think a lot of that comes with, all of the steps and all the steps and processes that we put in place after the grant agreement's been executed, because, the excitement's here today, right? Everybody's excited about B. They're filling out applications. We're doing all of our road shows and talking about how great this program is. But once we ink the deals, we've pivoted into compliance and monitoring for up to 10 years. And so especially with alternative tech and the guidance and everything, but it's 4 to 5 years, 4 to 10 years at this point. So we have to have these systems in place and make sure that they're executed properly.
Question on that. You talked about you had a couple that faltered. In some infrastructure industries like electricity, water, and used to be telecoms as well, the companies were required to have performance bonds. So if they did run into financial problems, there was money to make sure the project or the investments were executed, taken care of, even if by someone else. Did you have some feature like that involved in yours?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I know when we were talking earlier on about the program letter of credit, performance bonds, all of that, we use performance bonds at the state of Colorado, letters of credit. We can't use it there. It goes against our statutes, especially for local governments. But we do have performance bonds, so we can collect on those bonds when a subrecipient is no longer deemed viable. So we do have that mechanism as well. And I would say, from a federal management to a state management perspective, I think you're going to see far less defaults with the states handling these programs than you would see at the federal level. And I'm really excited about that, because we do a really good job. And for a lot of states, well, all of us do grants in every single agency. This isn't something new for us. And we're closer to the work and we know our stakeholders the best. We know their performance. To Vinny's point, there's trends. We know who to stay away from. We know who does a really good job. And I think the states are in a really good position to make sure that that ISPs deliver on their commitments.
Beneath, I want to ask you about this accountability question too, just the things that you've done. Just to add a little bit, I've not found it in the US, but I've seen it in other countries that once someone gets the bid for some sort of a project like this, they get down the road a little bit, then they realize that, wait, for the government to try and take this back now is really costly, really a problem. So I will just explain, I've got difficulties, I need more money, I need relaxation of requirements, because they know at some point they get the government over the barrel a little bit. So in accountability, how have you dealt with any of that issue if it's ever come up? But what else would you add to what Brandy's talked about with respect to holding people accountable?
No, Mark, you're spot on, right? It's look, at the end of the day, neither of us, myself, Brandy, or Dr. Holmes, have any interest in holding money back. I mean, if you think about it, we've got 48 months upon the approval of our final proposal to spend every single cent of our, 800 million to however much Dr. Holmes, I think, $1 billion for whatever, have over the next 48 months to get the job done so we could all move on in life. Look, at the end of the day, we have to not only ensure that these jobs get done, taxpayers get represented, but in holding these companies accountable, we have every right to basically tell these companies if, based on the conditions of the subgrant agreement, and we're, in our case in Louisiana, we're in the process of signing subgrant agreements with a number of these companies, a couple of dozen companies, and we're going to do that over the next 30 to 45 days, that they have to abide to the conditions that we set as a part of executing these dollars. And the way I've always told people, Mark, frankly, is look, taxpayer funds, if you take a dollar, a regular dollar, and you take a taxpayer funded dollar, from my perspective, my personal opinion, taxpayer funded dollar is incrementally, while absolute terms it's the same, for me, it plays as an increasing and important role, right? A much greater and important role. And so at the end of the day, from our perspective, these companies, yes, we've obligated the dollars. Yes, they have to execute, but they also have to equally earn these dollars. And so in order to ensure transparency and accountability, we're going to ensure that if a company says they're going to do something, they need to do it. And if they do it based on thresholds that we have currently in state law, that they're going to build to 10% of the locations or 35 or 60 or 85 or 100%, and they say that they're going to do that, then we will then send technical auditors out, as Brandy said, to ensure that the work is actually gotten done. Because the last thing we want to do is a taxpayer saying, hey, Vineeth, I see the company that you funded, they didn't get to me. The question naturally is, why not? There should be no excuse based on, again, our fortunate outsized allocation that these companies that actually bidded should come back to us in 6 months down the road, 8 months down the road, years from the road saying, I need more money. A couple of things that we are, again, behaviorally doing is at the moment you sign your grant agreement, we're going to try to start to release cash flow because time is money, right? Time value of money. The faster we can increase cash flow and accelerate the cash flow process, then the greater the incentive the company has to build and to move along in terms of the execution of these projects. So we have in state law a process, and in rules, the process by which these companies will get reimbursed. And at the end of the day, like what we're going to tell them next week whenever we convene, is that obligating the dollars is the easy part. They have to earn those dollars at the end of the day. And that actually provides a sense of relief to regular folks and the folks that we know that we're representing their taxpayer interests at the best.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, I was going to add.
Yes, Dr. Holmes.
There's one stakeholder we don't really do a lot of talking about. It's the residents in those communities. If no one else holds them accountable, which we all are, because we have to as our jobs, it's those residents. And I can tell you that I literally got back from vacation today and got a petition from an entire subdivision that does not want a particular provider to build in their community. Signed by every single one of them because they caught wind, because all of our information is public. It's on our website, that company is interested in applying for BEAD in their community. And they over the holiday got people to sign a petition, handwritten, and mail it to me over vacation. And so the silent stakeholder, which aren't often so silent in a lot of communities, are the residents who need broadband yesterday. And so I like to make sure that they also are on boots on the ground holding folks accountable as well, in addition to the requirements we have.
The local communities for to hold people accountable, you're right, are so critical. When this discussion was just launching 3 years ago here in Florida, I was talking with a city councilman from one of the small towns here, and he said that this is likely to be a big waste of money. He said, because I can look right out there at that utility pole. There's some equipment that was put there back in 2009, and it's never done a darn thing. And but he's the one who knew. The people at the federal level handling the money didn't know that that's what was going on, but he did. And so, yeah, the local input is really valuable. I'm going to at some point before too long ask you what you would really like to see the incoming administration do. But we do have a question that was emailed to us before we got started in this, and just to let the audience know, if you have questions, you can email them to Kate Beinkampen at aei.org. That's spelled KATE BEINKAMPEN at aei.org. Or you can text us, or not text us, but send it to us on Twitter or X at hashtag ASKAEITECH. So let me give you this question. I'm not going to direct it to any particular one of you. Someone volunteered to answer it. So one of the questions from the audience was, some states like Louisiana, not Colorado, are going to have some money left over after they've made their infrastructure commitments. What are your thoughts on what states should do to engage with the various stakeholders to make sure that money is used well, have good communication systems, set state priorities? What are your thoughts? How will this be handled? I'll just open the floor to anyone.
Yeah, let me just take a quick crack at that. So we anticipated back in April of the last year, April, May, that we were going to receive that we anticipated we were going to have extra funds. We didn't know if it was going to be $1 or 100 million or 500 million. And so we started having conversations with Governor Landry back in April, May. And what the governor said was, if we're in a fortunate position to receive and have extra funds beyond the traditional infrastructure piece, then let's leverage the infrastructure as an asset platform and enabler to drive Louisiana's growth in a number of different ways. Let's really focus on areas such as workforce development, areas of small business growth, and in health. And so we're investing 280 or so million of our 500 or so plus million in creating probably the country's largest sort of education to employment pipeline effort, starting from kindergarten all the way through your community college system. And the idea is kindergarten through 5th grade, high dosage tutoring, which is a model that works in Tennessee, and of course in certain areas in Louisiana. We're going to scale that. But the idea is that if you're at the end of 12th grade, you could have one of three options: A, pursue a career in the community college, go to the community college, pursue a career in the space to construct and build these networks. B, go through a 4-year college and learn about cybersecurity, AI, healthcare activities, or, be a nurse, et cetera, that's focused on telehealth, telemedicine. And then C, if you're an older adult that's maybe 30s, 40s that want a career switch, then you could work with your local workforce board to take classes, get paid for those classes, and then ultimately get jobs. So really, from the governor's perspective, he's using these federal funds to build off what broadband is going to do to really lay the foundation. We've done some really interesting analysis in terms of GDP growth based on the execution. We expect over the next couple of years, GDP is going to increase by several $billion. Small businesses will increase in revenue by several $billion. And so the $500 million that non-deployment activities are going to generate in Louisiana post the infrastructure piece actually represents 2% of the state's annual operating budget, which is substantial. And so we're going to spend the next couple of months working with cabinet agencies on effectively how to not only identify the KPIs, outcomes, but also execute these dollars.
And Mark, I will jump in really quickly and share Virginia. So we don't have our number yet, like Vineeth does, because he's finished his application round. We're currently in our application and it closes in March. And so Governor Youngkin has set forth the following priorities for what will be our non-deployment. And so we're gonna focus on cellular deployment, very similar to what we've done with the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative, where we've done broadband deployment. For last mile connections, we're gonna fund a cellular deployment program. We also will fund a multi-dwelling unit program as well. It's interesting because when we originally posed these ideas to NTIA in the early years of BEAD, I can't believe it's been 3 years. We talked about where these priorities would fall within the eligible uses of BEAD, and it just so happens that I'm saying cellular deployment, but it actually falls under non-deployment, and so does multi-dwelling units, where we'll focus on folks that live in multi-dwelling properties across the state, but can't get access to their individualized units. And then the last piece is we're partnering with state agencies, kind of on what Vineeth said on the tail end. We've actually have some proactive conversations with several state agencies and really looking at the adoption of broadband and how within their respective agencies, they're touching adoption. And so one example, our highest gross domestic product for Virginia is agriculture, of course. And so how do we ensure that folks that work in the ag space are incorporating technology into, everyday farm production? And so precision ag and smart farming. And so we're in conversations with fellow state agencies to take some of that funding and actually focus on adoption and utilization of internet as we build out connections across the state. And so we're fortunate to have additional dollars. What that additional dollar price tag is yet, I don't know until our applications close later this spring.
Okay, that's good. I appreciate your explaining those things. And what I encourage people to be sure to think about is, to the extent you can help people utilize these technologies, we press people to be towards the cutting edge. Because if you're the first 20% of adopters, the return on that effort is much higher than if you're in the back 20% of adopters. That's just what our research has shown. So we want to press, I think we would press people towards, let's get out there and we'll press ahead, and mistakes will be made along the way. But that's where the best effort or the best impacts are going to be had. Let me turn to my kind of last question for us. And that is, we have a new administration coming in. We have a new Congress, and some people in Congress have been pretty critical of the BEAD program. And personally, I've been critical of how slow it has gone. So I'm curious, what would you best want from the new administration with respect to BEAD? And Brandy, I'm going to turn to you first on that, and then we'll go with Vineeth and then Dr. Holmes. So Brandy, what would you want?
Yeah, so yeah, we do have a new administration taking the helm this month. And I think for us, and I've thought about this. If I were asked, broadband is a bipartisan issue, and it has bipartisan support. So I would love to remind folks of that as they take over and they come into office on January 20th. What I would like to see is us not to hit pause on this program. I know there's going to be changes in the new administration. I think we're all anticipating that. But BEAD is a really well-established program, and the states have worked so hard, not just the states, but our stakeholders too. I mean, this is a relationship that we've had with our stakeholders and providers and community. We have all worked tirelessly to get to this point, and you're starting to see states open up applications, and it's a big deal because we've gone through a lot over the last 3 years. And so I'm hoping that we don't hit pause. If there are changes, yes, you can make these changes as we go. I mean, I feel like the NTIA has done that the entire time, so that's not a new thing for us. We can adjust, we can pivot. We've been waiting for so long to get to this point. I'd hate to see us hit pause on anything because we're almost there. And every day people don't have internet, they're falling further and further behind. So reminding ourselves of what the original goal was. anything we can do to streamline the process, and right size the BEAD program, which includes the regulations to really right size it around what telecommunication infrastructure and deployment really actually is. I think there's a lot of things we can look at to streamline and right size the program so it's more compatible with our construction projects. Because right now we're going through what I would call a traditional federal procurement process that's really specific to like roads, bridges, dams, lakes, all of the things that we do on a more brick and mortar scale. And that makes sense. Some of this stuff doesn't make so much sense. It's very, very expensive for the states. It's incredibly expensive for providers, and anything we can do to free up BEAD dollars, to help with deployment by scaling back some of those regulations, would be helpful in streamlining the process. States know what's best. I want, the next administration to ensure that there's flexibility. Like I said earlier, I've had to pivot that required me to request several programmatic waivers from the NTIA to do that. But give us the flexibility, and let us do our best work, because all of us have broadband offices across the country now, so that's really, really good. And we all know how to get this done. I would like for the federal government to continue to lean on the states to do that. And instead of a more federally prescriptive program. So those are the things that I would suggest, the next administration to do to help support and move BEAD along.
Thank you. Beneath, what would
Yeah,
you?
yeah, just thanks, Mark. And just to echo a lot of the things that Brandy said, look, Arkansas just launched their broadband program, their grant application program for BEAD yesterday. I think we have 20 states that are either started their application process or somewhere in, towards the middle, towards the end of the application process, both red states and blue states. So, I think so the important thing is, again, we need to keep going. One thing that the broadband directors are really good at is, to your point, Mark, is pivoting. And so we fully expect, and I'm fully confident the next administration is going to do some process improvement, both operationally, but within NTI, but also policy-wise, to ensure that shovels are in the ground faster. And just like anything, if we need to change, aspects of our program to reflect new policies or to make things easier, then, Dr. Holmes and Brandy and the other 47 broadband directors, 6 territory directors, who have been pivoting and working like Gumby over the last couple of years will do the same, right? So fully confident that the process improvement aspects that the next administration is going to have will accelerate putting shovels in the ground quickly, and then we'll adapt to it just like anything else.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Holmes, we'll give you the last word.
And so for me, my job is to ensure every Virginian has access to broadband. And so I look forward to working with the new administration to allow flexibility, same as Vineeth and Brandy mentioned. And so we have a proven successful track record. And so my eyes is on the prize to ensure that every Virginian has access to broadband, regardless of who is in what administration. I will continue to get that job done.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it. We just got a question in about removing barriers to deployment, like rights of way or anything like that. Maybe just one of you, we only have a couple of minutes left. Would any of you like to just chime in and say, oh, here's what we did to make that easier, dealing with the rights of ways and such issues?
I'll jump in really quickly.
Sure, thank you.
And so VDOT, our Department of Transportation, oversees the right of way. And so that has not so much been a challenge. It's private easements in Virginia that's been a challenge, where we don't have eminent domain in Virginia, and so we're a property right state. And so what we've seen is where the public-private partnership has been really beneficial, which I hope will transition into BEAD, is the internet providers and local government representatives knocking on some of those doors. Because I will tell you, one homeowner or one property owner can prevent multiple homes from getting access on a private road. And so for us, gone are the days where ISPs think they can just mail out a letter to get someone to convince them to get them an easement. They've got to knock on doors. They've got to get to know the community. They've got to get to know the residents. And so private easements have been a concern for us right away, not so much. And so I think for private easements, just making sure folks get connected to the community and the residents. Because often a neighbor can convince another neighbor to give the easement so that they all can get broadband.
All right. Well, thank you very much. To Dr. Holmes, Brandy, Vineeth, your insights have been really valuable. And I hope that a lot of your colleagues around the states take heed and are able to improve their outcomes. As I listen to you talk about what you would like to see from the new administration, a lot of it's summarized around deregulate the states, let us adapt, let us serve the things, but also then watch and hold us accountable, if you're speaking as a state, that we want to be successful, that you watch us and measure us is all the better. And then, of course, for you states, to be able to work together and share with each other, that's going to be critical as well. So thank you for your expertise. I'd like to thank everyone for being part of this program and the AEI staff who made this all possible. To our audience, please watch for further events from the American Enterprise Institute and share your thoughts. Let us know what you would like to see our scholars work on and talk about and create like this, the events like this on. So thank you all very much.